My daughter and her husband laughed at me at family dinner. You can't even afford to buy a house? I just smiled and left. 2 months later, I returned as the owner of their building and tripled their rent. The laughter was what hurt the most. It wasn't a good-natured chuckle, but a high-pitched, contemptuous sound that echoed across the dinner table. It came from my daughter, Clara, and her husband, Mark, as I sat there, a silent spectator in a world I no longer recognized. We were celebrating my grandson's 10th birthday, and the conversation had predictably turned to real estate. "We're so lucky to have this place," Mark said, gesturing proudly around their sprawling penthouse apartment. "The market is so tough. I don't know how anyone our age can even afford to buy a house, let alone a condo. Don't look at Dad. He's been living in the same old house for 40 years. He's happy just to rent." Then she looked at me, a cruel, pitying smile on her face. "You don't even have a mortgage to worry about, do you, Dad?" The laughter, a sharp, cold sound, followed. They had no idea my old house was fully paid off and had been for decades. They thought I was a poor, pathetic old man scraping by on a meager pension. I had spent my life as a quiet, unassuming man. A structural engineer by trade, I had designed and built bridges, schools, and hospitals, structures that stood strong and proud. But my greatest project had always been my family. I had worked tirelessly to provide for Clara, to give her a life of comfort and opportunity. I'd paid for her college, her first car, and countless vacations. I'd even helped them with a loan for the down payment on their first house, which they had long since sold to move into this lavish apartment. They saw my kindness as a sign of my simplicity, my quiet nature as a lack of ambition. They believed they were smarter than me, savvier, more worldly. The truth was I had chosen a simple life. After my wife Helen passed away, I had found solace in my quiet routine. My old house was filled with memories of a love that was a world away from the cold, transactional nature of Clara and Mark's marriage. But their laughter, their blatant disrespect, was the final straw. They had not only mocked my life, but they had also mocked the sacrifices I had made for them. They had turned my love into a punchline. The hurt was real, but it quickly hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I looked at Mark, his chest puffed out with a false pride, and at Clara, her face a mask of patronizing pity. "You're right," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I don't have a mortgage. It's a luxury I can't afford." I finished my water, placed the glass gently on the table, and rose to my feet. "It was a lovely dinner. Thank you for having me." As I walked down the street, my mind was already at work. My years as a structural engineer had taught me to see not just the surface of things, but the foundation beneath. I knew the building they lived in. I had seen its blueprints decades ago, the old brick building with the beautiful facade, the one they rented their apartment in. It was a pre-war building, owned by a small local real estate company. It was a company I knew. A company whose financial records with my old world connections were not as private as they would have liked. I walked home, and instead of wallowing in self-pity, I opened my laptop. My phone rang a few minutes later. It was Clara, her voice a little too sweet. "Dad, are you okay? We were just teasing. You know we love you." I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "I'm fine, dear," I said. "I have a lot of work to do." The phone call ended. They had no idea that the work I was doing would turn their dream home into their greatest nightmare. My life, for the next 2 months, became a masterclass in covert operations. I spent my days in the dusty archives of the city's building department, poring over old blueprints and property records. My nights were spent in hushed phone calls with my old friend and lawyer, Evelyn, a formidable woman who reveled in a challenge. I had a significant nest egg, built over a lifetime of hard work and prudent investing. It was money I had intended for my grandchildren, but Clara and Mark's actions had made it clear that their entitlement knew no bounds. My new purpose was to use that money not just to punish them, but to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The first step was to discreetly research the ownership of their building. My old connections proved invaluable. I discovered that the building was part of a small family-owned real estate portfolio. The owners, an elderly couple, were looking to sell. The price was substantial, but within my means. I, the man who couldn't afford to buy a house, had more than enough to purchase a multi-unit apartment building in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. I instructed Evelyn to set up a shell corporation, a legal entity with no ties to me. The negotiations were quiet, swift, and entirely anonymous. Clara and Mark were completely oblivious, wrapped up in their own little world of cocktail parties and social climbing. Mark would occasionally call, his voice laced with a condescending pity. "Pop, You should really think about investing what little you have. This market is a gold mine. You're just wasting your money in a savings account." I just listened, a grim smile on my face. They thought I was a fool. A simple-minded old man who didn't understand the complexities of finance. They had no idea I was about to become their landlord. The final deal was struck in a small, nondescript office on the other side of town. The property was now mine. My ownership was legally protected by the Shell Corporation, a fortress of legal maneuvering that would be nearly impossible for them to penetrate. My identity remained a secret, a ghost in the machine. Their arrogance, meanwhile, was reaching a fever pitch. Clara called, her voice full of a triumphant giddiness. "Dad, we're planning a trip to the Hamptons for the summer. Isn't that great? It's so nice to be able to afford these things." The irony was breathtaking. They were planning a vacation completely unaware that the very roof over their heads was now owned by the man they had mocked. I knew the moment of truth was approaching. The final piece of my plan was a letter, drafted by Evelyn, addressed to all the tenants of the building. It was a simple, legally sound notice. A change of ownership and a new rental agreement. The new agreement, of course, included a significant rent increase, a tripling of the previous amount. The contract they had signed with the previous owners gave the new owner the right to adjust the rent with a 2-month notice. They had been so confident in their position, so sure that the previous, amiable owners would never raise their rent, that they never bothered to read the fine print. The letters were mailed out on a Monday. I sat in my quiet home, a cup of tea in my hand, and waited. The phone rang, but I didn't answer. I just watched the screen, a small, knowing smile on my face. The seeds of my plan had been planted. It was time for them to reap the harvest. The phone call came 2 days later, a frantic, furious sound that shattered the quiet of my home. It wasn't Clara, it was Mark. His voice was a tight, desperate shriek. "What the hell is this? We just got a letter. They're raising our rent. Who's this new landlord? We have a lease." "It sounds like you have some questions about your new lease. I might be able to help." "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and confusion. "It's me, Mark," I said. "Your new landlord and your old father-in-law." It was a silence so profound, so devastating, I could almost feel his world collapsing. I could hear Clara in the background, a high-pitched wail of disbelief and fear. But, that's impossible," Mark stammered, his bravado completely gone. You can't even afford to buy a house. You live in that old shack." "The old shack, as you so eloquently put it, is fully paid off. And the money I've been saving my whole life, the money you and Clara were so sure you'd inherit, was more than enough to buy your entire building. I made an offer the owners couldn't refuse. The rent is tripled. We can't afford that. We'll have to move. And I'm afraid your security deposit will be used to pay for a new coat of paint and some minor repairs. I'll be sending you a final bill for the rest." The apartment they had so proudly shown off, the one they had used to humiliate me, was now a financial trap. They had no savings, no other source of income, and no place to go. Their credit, already stretched thin, would be destroyed. Their dream apartment had become a cage, a ticking time bomb of their own making. The consequences were swift. They were forced to sell their expensive cars to cover their debts. Their social circle, the very people they had tried so hard to impress, turned their backs on them. The news, when it inevitably leaked, was a masterclass in schadenfreude. The man they had mocked for being a poor, simple fool had, in a single, brilliant move, dismantled their entire lives. As I sat there, a peaceful silence filling my home, I felt no anger, only a profound sense of satisfaction. I had not sought revenge, but justice. I had taught them a lesson not with anger, but with cold, hard logic, with the very skills they had mocked. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had turned their laughter into silence, their pride into despair. The man who couldn't afford to buy a house had just become their landlord, and that was a reality they would have to live with.